And welcome back once again to How to Survive 2025. I'm Brian Keene.
I'm Dacia Arnold.
I am Jim Cobb.
I am changing my name to Angry Santa because that's what Dacia said I looked like right before we hit record today.
The beard is so full. It's healthy. Looks very healthy.
Yeah.
It's a prepper beard, Dacia. It's multi-purpose. It keeps me warm. It helps me conserve food because if I'm eating soup in my fallout shelter, it gets caught in the beard, and then later I can, I have leftovers. Multifunctional. I can trim it off and fashion it into a pillow. There's just all kinds of
make a sweater.
A soup scented pillow. Awesome. Yes.
Oh my gosh. Those are the soft skills that we talked about last episode.
If you are a first-time listener, this is not the depth of knowledge that we offer. Please don't try that at home. Jim, what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about communication.
Okay.
Primarily the type of communication where you're receiving and sending information. And I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but I look at communication as having a couple of different purposes. Number one is staying in touch with friends and family, making sure everybody's okay. But the larger element or component of communication is you can only make an informed decision by definition if you have information. And that information is acquired through communication, predominantly receiving it, such as, through radio, social media, things like that. Now, I will readily admit right up front, I am not as up to speed on amateur or ham radio as I would like. It's one of my goals for this year. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. So we are going to be relying heavily on Brian's experience in radio as we go through this. And I know that Dacia has lots of questions.
I have a ton of questions.
So let's maybe start with the different tools of communication that are available to the average prepper. Okay. Number one, your basic cell phone. It isn't ideal in most disasters because you might not have a reliable signal. But if you can get a signal, you can use it to access social media. You can use it to access news reports. You can use it to keep in touch with one another, with family and friends. Next on the list, and we just lost Brian.
That's okay.
Next on the list would be a basic emergency radio, your AM, FM, NOAA, which is weather radio.
Okay.
National Oceanic and something.
Do you get those at the store?
Yeah.
And they're just weather radio?
Yep. You can find them at a lot of big box stores. You can find them online even easier at Amazon, things like that. What you want, the ideal is to have a radio that will tune in AM, FM, along with weather radio at a minimum. You can also get them that will be able to tune in shortwave broadcasts. But what you want are the type of radio that it has a crank on it. Okay, so you don't have to rely on a generator or batteries or anything like that. You just wind it up and away you go. As with so much other emergency gear, this is not something to just buy and toss on the shelf. You want to take it out of the box. You want to crank it up. You want to understand how to power it, and you want to understand how to access the different frequencies and how to tune in the broadcasts that are going to be of most interest to you. On top of all that, we have amateur radio or ham radio. This is a two-way radio communication system where you can transmit and receive. The one critical thing before I turn this over to Brian, you have to be licensed in order to transmit on ham radio frequencies. There is a significant part of the prepper world who will tell you, quite honestly, that the FCC is not going to be levying fines for people who are transmitting without a license during or after a disaster. And they're absolutely correct. The FCC isn't going to be worried about that. The problem is You have to understand how all of the radio equipment works. And in order to do that, you have to play with it. In order to play with it, that's where you need the license. If you transmit without a license, other ham radio operators are not going to look kindly upon you. And these are people you want to be on your side. You want to make friends with them. Brian, tell us about ham radio.
Absolutely. My grandfather, who flew on bombers during World War II over Japan, was a radioman. And when I went in the Navy, I was also a radioman. Now, I'd love to say I was following in his footsteps, but really I was just a dumb stoner kid who the recruiter said, "Oh, you want to be a writer or a disc jockey? You should join the Navy and be a radio man." Lesson learned. But yeah, ham radio, you can. And the reason you lost me there for a minute was I was standing up to get a toy. They make units that you can listen to ham radio without transmitting. There's plenty of them on Amazon. The prices vary widely. This is the one I recommend. Our YouTube listeners can see me holding it up. It's the Eaton, E-T-O-N. This is model number 750, the Eaton Elite 750. This was my Christmas present 2 years ago. I told Mary and my ex-wife and both of my sons and my stepdaughter that this was what I wanted for Christmas. It's a pricey unit, but it allows you to listen to shortwave and long wave radio broadcasts from all over the world. Dacia's got
I have questions. So ham, are we like ham like lunch meat? Is it an acronym? It is HAM.
I genuinely don't know if it's an acronym or not. It's what everyone has always referred to it as.
Okay.
Jim, do you know?
I don't know the source of the term, but like you, I mean, it's always been ham radio for as long as I can remember. It is spelled just like the lunch meat, HAM.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if it's an acronym. I don't know if it was just a nickname somebody came up with decades ago.
Right.
I really don't know.
Okay, but and this is not a walkie-talkie for anyone who can't see YouTube. Not a walkie-talkie. This
is designed, let's pretend there's a nuclear war or a zombie apocalypse, and there are pockets of civilization left in the world.
Yes.
And you know, what you want in a situation like that is information. Information is the key to survival. So this has 3 different antennas. It runs on battery. It runs on AC. There's an adapter you can get to run it on solar. It literally picks up broadcasts from all over the world. I have sat here in my office and tuned into Brazil. I've tuned into Germany. I pulled up Antarctica, the Micardo base one time. It also has AM, FM if you want to listen to, Katy Perry or the local sports team. It has everything. So this is the one I recommend to people. It's also got, date, time, alarm, all kinds of neat little functions. The important thing is you cannot transmit with that. You can listen to other ham radio operators. You cannot talk back to them. For that, you need to have a license. First thing you want to do is choose a license class. Now, I'm speaking to our American listeners. I don't know what the laws are for those of you in the UK or for those of you listening in Australia. You'll need to research that on your own. But here in America, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, they offer 3 types of licenses: technician class, general class, and amateur extra class. Each of those comes with its own privileges. For the purposes of what we're talking about, you want amateur extra or general class. You have to take an exam. There's all kinds of training centers and practice exams that you can research online. The best place to find them is www. Well, we don't have to say www. That shows my age. ARRL.org. They have the best practice tests. They can walk you through getting licensed. It's free of charge to use their website. I highly recommend them. Then you're going to want to register for your exam. You're going to want to take your exam. After you pass, the FCC charges you, I believe it's still $35, to get your license. And then you receive that in 24 to 48 hours. I mentioned the different kinds of licenses. Amateur radio licenses. They're valid for a decade, and you don't pay that $35 fee again. You renew them for free after that one-time fee. Wow. It's a lot of fun. Our entertainment these days is we stream something on television or we stream music. Ham radio is sort of a vintage form of streaming, and there are regular broadcasts every day that people do their own shows, and the only other people listening to them are other ham radio aficionados. And there's everything from some nut in Montana who thinks lizard people have taken over the world to people offering cooking tips and recipes. But the main thing is information. I have found it invaluable when something newsworthy is happening elsewhere in the world to find ham operators broadcasting from that region. And they often give you a perspective from the ground that the news just isn't reporting.
Yep.
In a grid down sort of situation, as I said, that's crucial. If let's say, usually we talk about more realistic scenarios on this show, but let's get a little further out. Let's say the plot from the film Red Dawn happens. Okay, China and North Korea invade the U.S. from multiple angles, and you're in your shelter that you've set up with your family, but you're cut off from civilization, and you don't know what's happening out there. Ham radio is a way to stay in touch, even if you're not transmitting, if you're just listening. It's a key means of information, and information is crucial in a situation like that.
In many disasters, ham operators become the backbone of emergency communications.
Oh, wow.
They will act as the backup for more official lines. They will cover the gap with emergency communications with, police and paramedics and fire and disaster recovery and all of that. One thing I would recommend if you want to pursue ham radio, to the best of my knowledge, every county in the United States has a ham club. Find it, talk to them, start going to their meetings, join their club. Ham operators, by and large, they will bend over backwards to help anybody who has a genuine interest in getting their license, learning how it all works. Once upon a time, you had to memorize Morse code. That is no longer a requirement to obtain licensure. And a lot of these clubs, I know some of it.
I know
a little bit of
SOS.
it. Yeah. A lot of the clubs, they will have all kinds of events throughout the year where, you can go and you can play with their equipment. You can test out your own stuff. A lot of times they'll do swap meets and you can find equipment fairly cheap to get started. We attended a field day several years ago. I took the kids, and they had it set up where, kids could sit down and they could transmit on the microphone and talk to people all over the country. It was really kind of cool. And they're super nice people on top of everything else.
I want to add to that for our listeners. If you are a single mom, if you are from a marginalized community and you're nervous about going to something like that, it has been my experience that ham radio clubs are some of the most welcoming people in the world. They are eager for new members because, quite frankly, at least here in our region, I'm the youngest member. It's a bunch of really old guys, and they're desperate to have new people, new aficionados, new enthusiasts. You'll find them very welcoming, sort of like the local beekeeper club, where it's 5 or 6 guys in their 70s, and they love to have new people come in, so they can show them the ropes. So yeah, definitely worth checking in.
I have questions.
Yeah.
So Brian, we were going kind of Red Dawn, thinking where cell phones probably wouldn't be practical if we could use them at all. So one thing about cell phones is you can track location. So in an instance where you don't want anyone to track your location, is a ham radio kind of the better way to go? Or can people like track you down based on radio frequency?
There's high-end equipment that can triangulate where a transmission is coming from. The best thing to do in a situation like that is stay quiet and just monitor.
Yep.
Okay. So if you're listening, you're off.
Yeah.
If you're listening, you're fine.
Okay.
Transmit only when the barbarians are at the gate and you have no other choice. Otherwise, just listen and act based upon what you're hearing.
You say shortwave and long wave. So is that like shortwave, like this way, or is it distance? Just don't laugh at me. Everyone has these questions.
We do. I'm trying to think how to.
Is it the wave, the length of the wave, or is it a physical distance?
I'm trying to think how to explain it in layman's terms. And honestly, I'm going to cheat and go to Google and see if there is a. You got to remember, Dacia, I learned all this stuff when I was 17, 18 years old, after boot camp. I know what it means. I'm not sure how to describe it.
Okay. Well, I have another question that Jim could probably answer.
Okay.
So truck drivers. So can you only pick up like the truck drivers that are driving physically down your road?
Okay. You're talking about CB radio.
Oh, CB. Oh, see, that's a whole new thing.
Yeah, that's a different thing.
That's a different animal. It's a kissing cousin, to the other things we're talking about. The advantage of citizen band radio or CB radio is, number one, it's free. You don't have to be licensed in order to transmit. Number two, you get to pick your very own really cool username. Bandit has been taken multiple times over. All right. The downside is CB is very, very limited in range. Okay. And realistically, all of radio is limited in range. The advantage that shortwave has over some of these other ones is you can bounce the signal around, you can hit repeaters, and you can literally communicate with people around the globe. Okay. CB, you can't do that. CB, I'd have to look it up again, but I think it's just a few miles. And when we start talking about like the little handheld walkie-talkies and that, it's even less.
Yeah, because those are like, so internal. I know a little bit from like working in a hospital and the closed circuits of like the little walkie-talkies within a building. And then I was watching the new Squid Game and they all hand out walkie-talkies and he's like, everyone turn to channel 7. And I'm like, you dummies, they can listen to every channel. They just got to switch until they hear you.
Right.
But anyway.
So Google gives you the same explanation I would give you. And we're getting into radiation and the atmosphere. But I think I have a way. Shortwave, it's right there in the name. It's short distance. Long wave radio waves, they can pass through objects. They can go much further. If you're driving truck late at night in, let's say, Rhode Island, and you're scanning your AM dial and you pick up a radio station from North Carolina or Kentucky, that's a long wave transmission. Shortwave tends to be much more powerful, much more crystal clear, but it doesn't have that distance that long wave radio has. Does that help?
It helps me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, now I wish the company commander and instructors had explained it.
One thing I would suggest when it comes to handheld walkie-talkies, number one, the range, you're never going to get what the package tells you you're going to get.
Mhm.
These are line of sight radio units. Now, what that means as a practical matter is the more buildings, trees, things like that in your area, the shorter the effective range is going to be. What you're going to want to do if you want to explore using those in your family or group is to really put them through the test. Now, as an example, a couple of decades ago when I was a private investigator, my boss invested in a set of these, at the time, new two-way radios that used family radio service, FRS radios. Now, to figure out what we could really do with these, he sat at the office and had one of them turned on. I turned the other one on and got in my car, and I just started driving. And every cross street, I would rattle off. And we got to the point where he couldn't hear me anymore. All right. Mark that off on the map. And now we know kind of an effective range in this urban environment where we were operating. Okay. Do the same thing at home. Go for a walk
Mm-hmm.
and start talking and see how far you can get and still be able to transmit and receive. And that gives you a very practical, realistic look at what you can do and what you can't do with these little handheld radios. Now, as you mentioned, anybody can tune into these if
Mm-hmm.
they get the same frequency. And like these FRS radios, you've got, I think it's like 15 different channels. That's it. Okay. All
Mm-hmm.
they've got to do is keep going click, click, click until they hear somebody talking and then figure out where they are from there. They're not secure. You can use them as long as you keep that in mind that there's nothing secure about these radios at all.
So if I'm just listening
Mm-hmm.
and I don't have any ham training, so I'm not
Mm-hmm.
certified, I didn't take any classes, but something happens and I need to hop on that radio. You said nobody's going to be like, no, don't do that. That's the wrong way to do it. You need to call for help this way. Is there any like quick, fast, and dirty kind of etiquette for radio?
I mean, yeah, the FCC isn't going to be issuing fines because you didn't have your license and you were transmitting while the Chinese invaded America. But, you, a key thing is to remember to let go of the microphone button after you
Mm-hmm.
transmit.
Yes.
You wouldn't
have to
believe
stay
how
over.
many people, yeah, especially if you're panicked, if you're in shock, it's an
Mhm.
emergency. They hold on to that button
Mhm.
waiting
Yep.
for somebody to respond, and your channel is open. They can't
Mhm.
respond to you until you let it go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The other part of this is ham radio is not plug and play. You have to know what frequency
Mm.
you're going to be using to be able to reach other people. Okay. We talked about the FRS radios. Now they've got, 12 or 15 different channels. Ham radio's got a whole lot more than that.
Yeah.
And if you're transmitting on a frequency that nobody is monitoring, you literally are just screaming into the wind.
Mm.
Okay. And that's where experience comes into play. That's where networking comes into play. And you understand what frequencies the ham operators in your area use on a regular
Mhm.
basis. So you're able to connect with them.
Now, there's another form of communication I want us to touch on. It's one that's accessible to everybody. You don't need a license to use it. And unless it's an extreme scenario like the one I brought up earlier, it's probably going to be easier to access. And that is social media platforms.
Yep.
Mhm.
I always think back to 9/11, the September 11th attacks. I had an email newsletter. This was in the days before MySpace or Twitter or
Mm-hmm.
Facebook or any of that. An email newsletter. And in my field, all of the authors and editors and publishers, etc., who were in New York City that day were emailing me or calling me to check in safe. And as they did, I would update my email newsletter, letting those of us in the rest of the country know who was safe who had not yet reported in. You see this a lot, particularly in natural disasters. The wildfires in California being a recent example, the flooding in North Carolina last year. Loved ones will check in on the social media platform of choice, let people know they're safe. And it extends beyond social media, platforms like Nextdoor, even Craigslist. It's a good idea to talk with your family and your kids and come up with a plan. If God forbid there's a mass shooting or something like that in your town, and cell phone service is down, you can't get in touch with each other. Here's where we're going to post so that we know everyone's okay.
Yep. What you can do is what's called a PACE plan, PACE. That is an acronym, unlike we not sure about ham radio. PACE stands for primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency. It's 4 different ways to accomplish a given goal. It was originally developed for communication plans. You can use this same concept about almost anything in the prepper world, okay? But what you do is you come up with 4 options. Your primary plan for keeping in touch with one another is your cell phone, just as an example, okay? Your alternate would be using your phone to text one another. Your contingency is to use the messaging part of your favorite social media app, Facebook, Twitter, X, whatever. And then your emergency plan is, I don't know, finding a payphone. So whatever the case is, whatever works best for your particular situation. The important part of this is that everybody involved is on the same page. Everybody involved knows that in an emergency, the first thing you're going to do is try making a phone call. You're going to try to call home or call mom or whatever the case is. If the phone isn't working, you're going to send a text. If the text doesn't seem to go through or if it's just hanging, then you're going to pick it up and use your Facebook Messenger, whatever the case is. Now, related to these apps is one other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is strictly a one-way communication tool. This is strictly information gathering. There are apps out there that mimic police scanners, where they will tune in scanner traffic. These are dispatches for police, fire, rescue, things like that. I highly recommend downloading one of those apps, becoming familiar with it, and having it set up for frequencies in your local area. If this was 25 years ago, I would tell you to go out and buy a police scanner. Okay. They were cheap enough back then. Today, a lot of departments are going to digital broadcast and you can't use the cheap scanners. You can use the more expensive ones, but they're like $400 or $500. These apps are free. Okay. The advantage it gives you is you can hear what the authorities are doing in your area. You can hear if there's a fire down the block. You can hear if they're putting up roadblocks and directing evacuation traffic along a certain route. All of these kind of things they talk about over these scanners. Using one of these apps, you can listen in and you can adjust your plans accordingly. And they're kind of fun to listen.
Is there one you recommend more than another? Because I'm sure there's a plethora of them.
There is a plethora. I can't think of the name of the one that my wife uses. I'll have to ask her because she's the one. That's her thing. She monitors that for us. I'll find out and then we'll put it in the notes.
All right, cool.
When we post this. But keep in mind, just because that app works best for us, it might not be the best option for everybody
in your area.
But years ago, I had a security gig and we had a police scanner and we would listen to that all night long. Just listen to all the different broadcasts, all the different things that were going on. Now, related to this, on Facebook in particular, a lot of areas have set up groups or pages where volunteers will monitor scanner traffic and post those dispatches on Facebook. That's another avenue to explore to see if there's one set up for your area. Just like we would say on YouTube, don't read the comments. Because a lot of those posts turn into dumpster fires, but the posts themselves can be very beneficial. And a lot of those pages have kind of evolved into being community, community squares, where you'll have not just emergency information be posted, but everything from lost pets to events that are coming up, things like that. They can be very, very useful as long as you ignore the comments, because the comments will just drag you down and beat you senseless.
In Pittsburgh, we call those people nebby or neb noses. Just
Okay.
nosy people.
Okay.
Is that an acronym?
Neb? No. I'm
around here, we just call them assholes.
Yeah.
But,
so
every place is different.
Another means of communication that I think we ought to touch on before we close out this episode. Let's say, Jim, that Dacia is out hiking in the woods by herself, and she trips in a groundhog hole, breaks her ankle. Her cell phone does not have coverage. Night is coming. It's getting colder. What are some ways she can communicate with the outside world or searchers to let them know where she is?
I know the answers to this one.
It starts with making sure somebody back home knows where you went, how long you plan to be gone, when do you plan to return, all of that. And if you don't show up and they can't get a hold of you, they should alert authorities. Now, searchers are out looking for you. The first and best thing to have is a very loud whistle. Okay? A whistle, the noise will carry much further than screaming, even at full dad or mom volume. Okay? You want to do 3 short, quick blasts in a pattern. 3-3-3, 3-3-3, 3-3-3. Patterns like that, the 3 is a recognized signal for help around the world. Okay? 3 quick blasts over and over and over. Another one to have is a bright flashlight. Another one is a glow stick with a short piece of cordage, about a 14-inch or 14 to 18-inch piece of paracord or something similar. Tie the glow stick to the end of it very securely. Snap and shake the glow stick to activate it, and then spin it in a circle. And it creates a giant glowing circle that's visible for a long ways. You can build a fire, assuming you can do it safely and keep it under control.
Mm-hmm.
You can build, depending on your situation, if you're looking for help from the sky, you're trying to signal rescue planes, 3 fires in a line is another signal for help. Remember, 3s. Let's see what else is there. What you want to not do that you'll see on Facebook all the time is, if you have a signal, change your outgoing message on your cell phone to say where you are and that you're lost, because then the person that's calling to sell you extended coverage on your car insurance is going to go, oh, Dacia needs help, and hang up and call 911. Don't do that. If you have a signal for your phone, call for help. Call or text 911 before you try anybody else.
Flare guns?
Flare guns, yes, but depends on how many flares you have. Flares are a single-use item.
One off and there's no one in your sector yet.
Yeah. There are like satellite messengers that you can buy and get a subscription to, where it's like a satellite phone where you're able to get a signal even if your cell phone can't. They can be kind of pricey, but if you routinely are spending a lot of time out where the sidewalks end, might not be the worst idea. I know there's a YouTube channel I follow called Outdoor Boys that I really enjoy a lot. And this guy spends a lot of time in the most remote parts of Alaska you can imagine. And he keeps a satellite messenger with him, and he checks in with his spouse, makes sure she knows he's okay, where he is, and all of that. So that's definitely an option worth pursuing. But again, Every outdoor adventure starts by telling somebody at home where you're going, when you're leaving, how long you plan to be gone, when you'll be returning, and you check in with them when you get
Mhm.
back. If they don't hear from you at the appointed time and they can't reach you, there should be zero hesitation on their part to get a hold of the authorities and say, hey, they're not home. They said they would be home by this time and they're not. That whole thing you hear in the news about, well, they haven't been gone 24 hours yet. That's bullshit. Okay. In the real world, they want to know as soon as possible so they can get boots on the ground and start searching for your dumbass. Okay. It's as simple as that.
There's one more thing that we didn't touch on, and
Yeah.
people who are our age who were alive before cell phones had to memorize everyone's phone number.
Mm-hmm.
And or you had to write it down and keep it in your purse or your wallet. And so I would really stress to people your top three. That's your mom, your dad, your spouse, your kids.
Yep.
Memorize those phone numbers, because if you do lose your phone, if it's unavailable, if you do get to a payphone, know how to use a payphone. I don't even know if I'm sure they have instructions written on them. They're not like they used to be. You can't shove 35 cents in and make a local call.
But can you have a collect call from, hey mom, I'm done, come get me?
We oughta baby eats a boy. Yeah, collect calls. They should have instructions on payphones, but if you don't know the phone number that you need to reach, it's not, there's no operator that you can call and say, hey, this is my mom's name and their address. Can you plug me in? Yeah.
Good point. Very good point.
Those days are gone.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Anything else before we let folks get back to their day?
One more thing.
Yeah.
One more thing.
It's going to be okay.
That's right. It is. All right. We will see you next week, folks. Appreciate you tuning in. If this is your first time tuning in and you found the information here helpful, maybe you can help us out with a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to. We'll see you next week.
And tell a friend. Tell 2 friends.